Hello everyone, it's Old Guardian here. The second balance patch to Festival of Legends is coming later this week, but there is still a little bit of time to climb the ladder before that, so in this video I'm going to take a look at the top 16 best decks before the balance patch. What has happened since last week? Well, not a whole lot, I have to say. Like, if you look at the top decks, there's a couple of small adjustments, but nothing major. Almost all of the absolute top decks are exactly the same. If you look at top 16, then there are a few different decks here, but mostly the new decks are some of the lower rung decks. So, for example, at number 16 we have Menagerie Warrior. Last week I didn't feature any warrior decks. I had a Warlock deck last week, and this week I don't have any Warlock decks, so Warlock, Thaddeus Warlock, Imp Warlock are just not doing that well. They are hovering at around 50%. And Warrior seems to have managed to find some answers, but it's still not great exactly. Anyway, let's take a look at all of the decks, and I can talk about the meta a little bit more while we review the decks themselves. So, at number 16 we have Menagerie Warrior. And Menagerie Warrior has really found at least one key answer, and that is the addition of Nelly, the Great Treasure. Nelly is a real star performer in this deck, and it has lifted Menagerie Warrior to somewhat close to viability at least. Then there's also an Enrage Warrior that's being played, which is a little bit weaker but still sort of around 50%, and then all the Control Warrior decks are doing just much worse. It still looks like Riffs are not worth playing at the moment. The Riff buffs, the Power Riff was just left in its weak state and it just ruins the whole package, so Riffs just don't have what it takes at the moment. And that's why Riffless Menagerie Warrior with Nelly in it. That's the key solution at the moment for Warrior. At number 15 we have Tony Druid. Druid decks, like, how do you make a difference between these Druid decks? Last week I featured the Ozumat version of the Hero Power Druid. Like, they all have the Hero Power synergy cards. Then they all have Anubrekan, Undeking, and Zog Foxsnout. So that package remains there, and then maybe they have some other things, like they can have Ozumat and some AoEs, or maybe they run Jailer and Tony. Just a little bit of spice, I guess, on the top. But Ramp, Hero Power package, Anubrekan package, all Druid decks look like that, and they are all pretty close to each other in performance. And that performance in case of Tony Druid, for example, that's like 52% win rate, which makes it playable. And at number 14 we have a real newcomer, and that newcomer is Control Priest. I had the pleasure to meet this on the ladder, and this deck is totally infuriating to play against. So many discovered things. There are also AoE silence, and yeah, that's just Priest. And why is Control Priest in the meta? Control Priest is in the meta because it has two good matchups against really popular decks: Unholy Death Knight and Blood Death Knight. And because Unholy and Blood are really popular, then that means that, hey, Control Priest has a chance, even though Control Priest has so many bad matchups. It doesn't have a lot of great matchups, just a couple and a long list of bad matchups, but when those good matchups are super popular, then suddenly stuff like this can be played on the ladder. At number 13 we have something else new, and that new is Spooky Mage. Now basically 3 Mage decks that are being played on the ladder. There's Burn Mage, which is the strongest Mage deck, then there's Spooky Mage, this list, and then there's Mech Mage. Mech Mage is struggling to maintain that 50% win rate. It's still somewhat playable if you really enjoy it. I featured that last week, but I dropped it from the list for this week. And this Spooky Mage is a little bit better. You just discover a bunch of stuff, you do those skeleton things, and then you have Grand Magister Romat as well to recast your discovered spells. So I actually also met this deck on the ladder, and this can also be quite infuriating to play against. Yeah, that's just Hearthstone things. And at number 12 we have the best Mage deck in the game at the moment, which is Burn Mage. And Burn Mage decks have recently moved to this Vexallus variant. Vexallus variant has become dominant. I'm not sure if it's because people have learned how to play with Vexallus, or whether it's because meta has changed so that Vexallus is stronger, but either way, Vexallus lists have overtaken all the other variants of Burn Mage, so now it has 2 pieces that can combo around with Egwene and Vexallus, and then those damage spells and boom boom. At number 11 we have Miracle Rogue. Miracle Rogue is the exact same list as it was last week. Now that Posig has been added to a deck, it's obviously perfect. Any deck with Posig in it is automatically better, especially if it's an aggressive deck. And yeah, it just does miracle things and it's reasonably good. And at number 10 we have Blood Death Knight. It's actually really hard to say which Blood Death Knight deck is the best one, because there are more Blood Death Knight lists than anything else on the ladder. Like, everyone and their dog wants to have their own variant of Blood Death Knight. You can always change at least some Discover card or something, or add an ETC, just something. This is the same list that I featured last week, the list with Sketchy Strangers, and this is at least one of the best performing Blood Death Knight lists. But because there are so many tiny variations, it's really hard to say, but I mean, they're just changing whatever stuff discovers more stuff. For example, Paparazzi is pretty good, so you could also try that one in this deck. There are a couple of Paparazzi lists as well, but I mean, the sample sizes are like 200 games. It's impossible to say how good they are exactly. Anyway, Blood Death Knight, overall, it's an okay deck. It remains playable throughout the ladder, it's really popular, people enjoy this playstyle, and you can enjoy the playstyle too. And now we're starting to reach the point of the list where the decks just don't change that much anymore. Spell Demon Hunter, number 9. Pretty much the same as last week, and also exactly the same list as last week, this combo-oriented Steno, Silvermoon, Alchemist, Abusive Sergeant list. There are also lists that cut the Abusive Sergeant and add Fellerin, but there's not enough data to say whether that change is actually beneficial. And at number 8 we have Hybrid Hunter. Hybrid Hunter, it's sort of like Face Hunter style opener, but then it has a little bit of top end, thanks to Hope of Quel'Thalas, Faithful Companions, Hydralodon, Strangledawn Heart, King Crush. So you can get King Crush out there, hit some face, Strangledawn Heart, King Crush back, hit some face again. So pretty aggressive set, but still not all of these cards are super cheap. Number 7 is Totem Shaman, exactly the same list as last week again. Just get a lot of stuff on the board and Bloodlust. It's an old strategy. I mean, it worked back in vanilla, it still works. And at number 6 there's Undead Priest. Undead Priest list, they're basically 28 cards the same, as I talked about last week. In this list there's Amalgam of the Deep and there's Boneflinger. Sometimes there's a pair of Boneflingers. Sometimes there's a pair of some 3-drop Undead. It's really hard to make any difference between those lists, but like this one is currently maybe in the lead. Anyway, 28 cards the same. They're all swarm lists, they all have Rotting Necromancer, so they all share the same core basically. And the last 2 slots are, I guess, kind of flex slots, because there's quite minor differences between all the variants that use different cards in those slots. At number 5 we have Pure Paladin, same list as last week. Diapsalmas, Pure Paladin with Anachronos in it with Guardian's Grace. It just has become the dominant variant of the archetype for the class, and it looks pretty strong. Number 4, Outcast Demon Hunter, also the same list as last week. This list with 1 copy of Rusted Stage, 2 copies of Hawkstrider Rancher. There's also a list that reverses those, but this seems to be the superior one, so this one it is. Now we have already reached the top 3, and there's some changes for the third and the second best deck in the game. Because Frost Death Knight now, what do you do when you meet a meta where there's Outcast Demon Hunters, there's Unholy Death Knights, there's a lot of Swarm decks, Totem Shamans, well, you add some more AoE to your deck. And yes, Hardcore Cultist in 2 copies in this list, and in this specific meta, Hardcore Cultist actually looks like a good card. Hardcore Cultist has been attempted in Frost Death Knight multiple times, but there just haven't been quite enough Swarm decks in the meta to justify, because it's not that great, but it does deal some AoE damage. But now there's so many Unholy Death Knights that Hardcore Cultist has become better. It just improves the matchup so much. Frost Death Knight is so strong against Unholy, and Frost Death Knight, third best deck in the game. Also, the second best deck in the game, Big Demon Hunter, has had some evolution. This variant was existing already last week when I made the video, but there wasn't enough data about this, so I wasn't really certain whether this is an improvement, but now it seems clear that it is an improvement. This runs Abyssal Depths and Crush Claw Enforcer. No Lady Steno. No other Naga apart from the Crush Claw Enforcer and Fellscale Evokers, which are Demon Nagas. So Fellscale Evoker is one of the most important cards in the deck, perhaps the most important card in the deck. And with Crush Claw Enforcer, you can tutor it, and boom, there you go. Slight improvement to Big Demon Hunter archetype. And finally, the very best deck in the game has not changed at all since last week. It's Unholy Death Knight. It's the exact same list as well. Unholy Death Knight is getting targeted a little bit more, but it still keeps rising in popularity so far. Obviously, balance changes coming later this week, so we'll see what's going to happen then. But right now, if you really want to climb Unholy Death Knight, if you really want to counter Unholy Death Knight, and you still want a strong deck for climbing, then Frost, with the addition of those AoE minions, that's a good little bit of a counter choice. And once we get the new balance patch and some data of that, I will update the list and I will keep you updated. Thank you for watching. Click like and subscribe if you enjoyed this, and a special thanks to all of my Patreon supporters, YouTube members and Twitch subscribers who make all of these videos possible.